The term progressive today, as far as American culture and politics are concerned, has very much of a liberal slant to it from a political sense, oftentimes heavily left, but in essence, not necessarily trying to increase bureaucracy or anything else like that. Progressives of today in 2020 have the idea that they want to make things more fair and equal for everybody in a truly equal and fair society. There's nothing wrong with that idea. Some of the things that progressives espouse sometimes stretch the boundaries of the way people think, and that's the intent. Okay, they want to espouse the idea of challenging conventional wisdom and seeing if there are inadequacies and inefficiencies. In fairness unto all, fairness unto the LGBTQ plus community, the black community, Hispanics, minorities, people of color today. Um, Various different things differentiated modern progressives from progressives of the era in which we're discussing in this chapter 20. Progressives from 100 years ago had the idea of they want to, yes, we want to make things better in society because things have drastically changed with all this technology, population growth, and other things that have happened in our country. We see various different corporate interests get somewhat out of control. We want to rein things in. We see drunkenness, we see promiscuity, we see slovenliness, anti religion. We also see people who are suffering. The progressive movement from the turn of the century, 20th century, espoused the idea of taking a liberal concern for social and human well being with a conservative concern to tighten in society's ills, drunkenness and promiscuity and things along those lines that I talked about. How can we merge those two things together so as to help our society keep a hold of itself? And can we perhaps utilize the role of the government to improve that as well? So we're going to talk in this section of chapter 20 about what progressives believed. And one of the things that they saw was how we talked about in previous chapters about social Darwinism and laissez-faire survival of the fittest corporate monopolies that would emerge as a result of our industrialization. They saw the largesse of many of these corporations just getting somewhat out of control. So they wanted to better society, progressives did, and one of the things that they saw was maybe implementing some things that would keep corporations from becoming too much of a monopoly and too far out of control. What can we do to make things truly fair? And this idea of social Darwinism, does it have to extend to society? Can we do things as a society that would promote fairness for all and not just let others slip by the wayside? So, one of the things that progressives of this era realized was that as human beings, we're very connected to one each other. And instead of trying to tear each other down, how about we form social networks? How about we perhaps have social relationships that promote welfare of society in general? Okay? And I don't mean welfare from a government sense, but just the overall general well-being. And so we as a society can do better. And we want to break some of these ideas of there being government monopolies, or rather corporate monopolies, that exist. Progressives of this era believe that modern government can play a role in improving and stabilizing society. And maybe to perhaps influence certain behaviors, of which we'll talk about here shortly as well. Okay? Otherwise, though, it was around this era that you started to see a form of government, or I'm sorry, a form of journalism come about around this time, where you have journalists who have somewhat of a social crusade. If you turn on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, whichever you turn on, You see hot takes with XYZ person or this, and the other. Can you believe what the president did today? Can you believe what that political party did today? Can you believe what's going on? A lot of it's sensationalism. However, it was around this era that that sort of modern journalism begins to take shape. Its original intention was to bring to light various different injustices. So, if you sensationalize an injustice, you're going to draw more people's attention to it. You see it today with many of the modern social movements. The media coverage of Black Lives Matter, various other different things that go on in society. Oftentimes, the media likes to really hype certain things, and it's to get people's attention. And one of the things about journalism is that oftentimes journalism does it to be on a crusade, but they almost seem to be doing it to get ratings. Journalism is controlled by only a few different major media outlets. You look at ABC News, for example. They're owned by Disney. You look at NBC. They're owned by Comcast, or is it General Electric? One of those. There's the corporation that owns Fox News. You see only a few different major corporations that own or have subsidiaries of media markets, and it's concentrated, and it's all centered around ad revenue. Whoever has the best ratings, if you've ever heard of a thing called Sweeps Week, that's like Ratings Week. The better you do during sweeps, the higher prices you can charge for your advertisements. Let's draw eyeballs. Let's have something really crazy, something really juicy. Kind of shady if you ask me. Okay? That being said, though, the idea of bringing some things to critical light came about 100 years ago in the progressive era in the form of muckrakers. At the time, President Roosevelt, we're going to talk about in a little bit, referred to them as people who basically rallied up the muck and mud, muckrakers, to bring to light various different ideas of injustices going on, and how, for example, oil companies, or maybe in that year, railroad companies, were perhaps corrupt, and how the American society was being perhaps cheated by the various forms of monopolistic corruptness that goes on within them. So involving or exposing scandal, corruption, would bring to public light some of the wrongs that are going on and how they could perhaps be improved. Also, you have folks in the progressive era who have the idea for economic and social justice. So you hear a lot today about social justice and things like that, social justice warriors and that sort of a thing. But it was around this time that progressives wanted to utilize the idea of perhaps maybe merging some form of religion with the idea of social justice. And this became known as social gospel. And it became an effort to kind of make faith a tool in social reform. Okay? So there are various different things, especially in cities. If you think about cities, especially around turn of the century, 20th century, they're overcrowded. And whenever you have a lot of people in a small area, you're going to have conflict. No wonder so many people want to live out in the middle of nowhere and in the city, out of the city, and they want to live in the country. Yeah, I kind of get it. It's peaceful. It's quiet. You don't have conflict. You don't have somebody right on top of you banging their drums or playing their stereo like 4 o'clock in the morning in full blast, listening to Metallica or something like that, like I did in my former apartment when I was first out of college. Interesting. You hear all kinds of things in an apartment complex, by the way. That's a whole different conversation. Some things that you might hear in an apartment complex. What are they doing above me? The people that live next door to me, they're doing something fun. Wonder what's going on there. All right. That's pretty close to me. That's okay. Whatever. Otherwise, though, the idea of engagement with progressivism combining with religion would have appeal because America is still very much a Christian nation around this time. You want to bring the idea of reform as it can relate to organized religion. Okay? But it was also around this time in American history where you have people who notice that others are doing without, or you have folks with mental issues, or perhaps various different physical ailments and they can't really help themselves, or maybe there's a form of development issues, anything else along those lines. And there would be a need for an industry that could perhaps serve this community. And so you would have social work as we know it today get its roots in this era in American history, in the progressive era, as you have people who identified, boy, there are a lot of immigrants who are coming here who not only can't speak English, but many of them have mental differences or even disabilities, or they're struggling to learn a new language and acclimate, or there are all kinds of different issues. What can we do to help them? That became a question around this era. So that's something to also think about. And social work became something that would arise as an industry around this time. So that was something there. Furthermore, you had the idea that enlightened reformers could help establish various different government works to help kind of rein society in. Okay? A bureaucracy, if you will. And through these, you would have various different scientific truths that government could use to help promote certain behaviors. For example, 50, 60 years ago, people smoked cigarettes like they were going out of style. They'd smoke several packs a day. You'd go to a restaurant, most of the people there would be smoking. You go to a library, people are smoking. You go to a department store, people are smoking. In Vietnam, on the battlefields, there'd be dudes smoking cigarettes. They're in a foxhole and they're smoking cigarettes, and while the mortar shell's going on, it's crazy. Okay, people smoke cigarettes like they're going out of style 5, 6 decades ago. Okay, it was determined through scientific proof that wow, if you smoke cigarettes, you put yourself at far greater risk for developing lung cancer and other pretty severe issues. Wow. Furthermore, you don't even have to smoke cigarettes. You just might need to be exposed to them to have some of these ailments. That's really bad. It's also really expensive from a medical standpoint. So, how do we maybe perhaps curb people's smoke habits? Well, the government had the idea of, okay, if a price per carton is as such, we are going to impose a tax on cigarettes as such. So basically, we're going to more than double the price of cigarettes. So if you're going to smoke cigarettes, you're going to pay an awful lot more for it. We'll get some tax revenue because of it, but in reality, you're going to perhaps price people out of the market to where they're not going to smoke as much, if at all. Okay? Now, if you've ever smoked, those who smoke a lot find it exceptionally difficult to stop smoking because of nicotine. Okay? I've never smoked, so I don't really have that sort of knowledge base within that, but I can only imagine it would be quite difficult. But that's an idea of social engineering that came out about this time. Government action through bureaucratic form to encourage societal behaviors in various different ways. Okay? You would also, as a result of much of the technology around this time, you would have an emerging middle class. Because previously you had a lot of wealthy people and a lot of not so wealthy people. Well, now because of industrialization, you're creating various different professions. Engineers, scientists, middle managers, clerks, all kinds of different things that might require a certain skill set that goes beyond what your average person can do, but maybe not super wealthy. You're kind of in the middle, i.e. an emerging middle class. That's where most of us are. So you have a segment of society that really begins to develop around this time, and they would become the backbone of American society from this point forward. Also, through this time, medicine and medical advancements would be very important. So much so that the American Medical Association was advented around this time so as to promote licensure for scientifically educated doctors and medical professionals. You no longer are you going to go into bloodletting or anything else that they used to do, those medieval practices that went into the 18th and perhaps even 19th century. You're now going to rely on an emerging science to promote medicine and make medical advancements. You're also going to have various different professional works, the American Bar Association for attorneys. You've got to become licensed. You got to pass certain exams and licensure, and that way you can be practiced. And that also became somewhat of a status symbol. You have your medical doctor in the AMA, you're a licensed attorney, registered with the bar. Okay, it's somewhat of a status symbol that helps keep people out who don't necessarily have the right wherewithal as far as their education is concerned. You would also have emerging professions such as nursing because of medical advancements. We mentioned social work. Teaching. Teaching, as more and more schools became prevalent and were built, teaching became more prevalent. Typically, women who worked professionally worked in one of those roles: social work, nursing, or teaching. Okay? Nowadays, you don't have to be a woman to do those things. You have plenty of men who are nurses, and you have plenty of high-level executives in political offices that are also women. But back 100 or so years ago, women who worked primarily worked in one of those three different fields. Okay? It's a start for something, but it raises the conversation about just where women really belong in society and where they may be headed.